Thank you for joining me. My name is Jenna Fortinsky, and welcome to my podcast, Simply Jenna. I am a registered psychologist and owner of Simply Counseling Services, a private counseling group in Calgary, Alberta. In working with my clients, I have noticed that I offer something different. The difference is simplicity and balance. I want to share that with you using this platform. Join me as we discover together how to keep it simple. Welcome. Here we are. It's our very first episode of Simply Jenna, and we're so excited. How are you doing, Nikki?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm feeling kind of nervous and excited for this venture, and just thinking about how we're in a new year. And for me, this new year means getting back to school, which I haven't done in about 6 years. So I have all kinds of mixed emotions. I don't know. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. 6 years. My goodness.
I know, right?
I don't know what I was doing 6 years ago.
Exactly.
Oh
Precisely.
my gosh. I'm doing good. I really can't believe that we are actually in a new year and for a year now with this pandemic stuff. It's kind of that feeling of flip-flopping back and forth of it's been the longest year ever, but yet it seemed to go by so fast in some ways.
Yeah, I agree. And it's crazy to think about, in thinking about this past year, how much our normal or our routine has changed. And there is no more normal anymore, or it's a new normal, I guess. And so I think for today, that's why we were hoping to focus on this concept of happiness and talking about happiness in a general sense, but also focusing in a pandemic.
Yeah, totally. I think that within my private practice, so many people we've seen over the past year struggling with, what is happiness? How do I create happiness in my life? And how do I grasp on to having a little bit of consistency of happiness? So it's definitely prevalent in the city that we're in. And I think everybody's really struggling with how do they get this into their lives. So definitely a good topic to start with, I think.
I think so too. And so I think the best place to start when we're having this conversation about happiness is maybe a definition of it or defining it for our listeners. So what does happiness actually mean?
Well, I think that's a big question. Happiness to me is about balance and also what you focus on in your life. Now, I know when we say balance that everybody is like, oh my God, balance. Who has balance? And I know that it's a tall ask, especially with what's happening right now. But we really need to look at what our expectations are of our feelings and what our expectations are for balance. And I think somewhere in that muddy middle lies happiness.
That's a really good. But then what could those expectations look like?
Well, for me, what I've noticed, for myself and also for the clients that I work with and people that are in my circle, that when we think of happiness, we always have that knee-jerk reaction to think that, okay, happiness is that day at Disneyland, or the day I got my dream job is that day at Disneyland, or the day I got my dream job, or, the day I finally finished school and I can start my life and never have to think of school again. And well, yes, those are really happy moments, fantastic moments in any case. But that's not the happiness that we're here to talk about. Those little moments where everything feels just right or good or okay. So examples I usually give my clients are, those mornings where you wake up when your alarm goes off and you don't press snooze and you're like, yes, I got out of bed. Or maybe your makeup turned out just perfect and you can look in the mirror and say like, yes, it's finally that eyeliner is straight. Or maybe you had an amazing breakfast and you got all the food groups in and you feel great about it. So those little moments are the happiness that we're talking about today, using and acknowledging it and kind of creating this little bit of a bank of these moments throughout your day.
And so what I'm hearing you say is a lot around the idea of maybe happiness isn't something that just comes to us or it's something that just happens. Maybe it's something that we actually have to work at.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out. Definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out, because that is a huge misconception, is that happiness does happen naturally. So my famous saying to everyone about, happiness and it happening naturally is, if someone tells you, 10 great things about you and says
Definitely the bad thing at time over and over again. And I would probably even remember exactly what the person said and how they said it to me too.
exactly.
Precisely, right?
Yes. And you're not alone in thinking that, because I think even people listening to this are probably shaking their heads and saying, yeah, like that's me. So human beings naturally think negatively. It's easy for us to think of the negative, and it's easy for us to keep track of what's happening in our life that's negative. So therefore, happiness does take work, which means that you do have to purposefully think of and acknowledge what's good, okay or neutral.
Right. And it makes me think of that whole thing that you heard growing up about, if you force yourself to smile, then you'll automatically feel better. So you're actually spending time on being focused in on actually being happy, taking note of that and doing it in a purposeful way, like you said.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we, with social media and everything that's around us, the expectation is that happiness just happens. We don't really see the behind the scenes work that happens,
right,
to make people happy. And that's where there's a huge disconnect nowadays. People are thinking, well, look at all these social media pictures, or look at what's happening on the TV. These people are happy. How come I'm not? Or how can I find any sort of happiness with everything that's going on?
And specifically too, with the pandemic, there was a huge push. I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a huge push with people who were posting on social media about all of the things that they were able to accomplish because the pandemic was happening, right? So
Yes.
It was like, oh, I'm going to become an excellent baker and I'm going to reorganize my whole house. And whereas most of us were just trying to struggle through, I've got my kid at home, I'm trying to get my work done, I just need to make it through the day, right?
Yeah.
So that influenced so much of what we were experiencing at the time, right?
Yeah, and it put a lot of pressure on everybody. And if you did those things, great, good for you.
Right.
That's amazing. Way to harness your energy and the support that's around you to accomplish those things. And highlighting that those things are likely there for that to happen is to have the support and have the energy, and that it's already existing for you. If it's not, it's going to be a struggle, and that's okay. Right. And I think that's where, again, we go back to balance and, what we're putting our focus on, aren't out of control, and that we are having expectations that are just for ourselves, not what other people can do.
Right. And so it makes me think about too, just thinking in this last year, I spend a lot more time thinking about the negatives of things that I missed out on, right? So time with family, or I think about that for my kids too, especially that they missed out on time with their immediate and extended family. So how do we, in light of thinking of that, how do we switch our focus? How do we reframe that thinking? And like, what does that look like in a practical sense?
So that goes back to the examples that I gave you, which are very small things that happen every day that we can really harness a lot of power out of those things, and we can really use them to our advantage. So like I used the example of getting out of bed on time with the alarm, or your makeup turning out great, or having a great breakfast, going out for a walk, great, or having a great breakfast, going out for a walk. The power is in acknowledging it. So saying out loud to yourself, like, wow, it felt good to get out of bed on time today. Or I'm proud of myself that my makeup turned out good, or it feels good, or I look good. Or, my body is satisfied with the food that I've put in it. And I feel energized, and I'm happy with that. Being able to say those things to yourself is really what sets the tone for creating that sense of happiness. And it just sinks in a little bit deeper in your brain, and it feels like, okay, like my brain is seeing that and I can feel it.
So there's a lot of power in thought, right?
Totally.
That's what I'm hearing.
Totally.
Yeah. If I'm actually actively thinking about it,
yeah,
then that's what's going to make the difference is I'm paying attention to what thoughts are even happening in the first place.
Yes.
Right? Happening in the first place.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's almost like that first step of I need to actually acknowledge what is running through my brain and in this moment,
Yeah.
taking note of that and then letting it really sink in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, really realizing that you do have control over your thoughts.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
That
Yep.
you can say things to yourself, encourage people to say things out loud. I know it sounds crazy, but it just really helps to interrupt a lot of thought processes that are happening. I feel like when we keep things inside, it can spiral really quick.
Right.
So if we're saying things out loud, then it interrupts those spirals, and it just keeps your brain really focused on what's happening in that moment for you.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because it almost seems obvious in a way, right? Like that's so obvious probably to our listeners of like, well, right, obviously I'm going to think in a positive way, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it's there is a lot of work in actually practicing that. I'm wondering then about kids because I feel like kids are excellent practitioners of that, of being able to truly live in the moment, taking note of the happy moments and talking about the fact that they're a happy moment, right?
Yes.
Like they will tell you when they're happy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I feel like we can learn a lot from them in the way that they practice that.
Yeah, totally. And this is an opportunity for us to learn from our kids. No longer are we, yes, we can teach them, but we need to really seize the opportunity to learn from them. And that's one of those things that we can learn from them is to be in that moment and to use, the quote unquote word of the year, I think is mindfulness. Yeah. But to just really be in that moment and to say out loud what it is that you're enjoying or what feels good or what feels neutral or just okay. And using that to create kind of that bank to keep your day going. Like what our great morning, they're probably going to talk about it all day long, yes. Right into the evening, right up
yes.
until bedtime when they're trying to delay going to bed.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's absolutely right. And so something that came up actually in my school, just speaking in terms of the spirit of learning, something that came up in my gratitude and happiness, and research has actually shown this. So meaning that a person who practices gratitude is more likely to actually be happy. So can you tell us a little bit about why that link happens? Why is there this link between gratitude and happiness?
Well, ironically enough, it goes back to where your focus is, right? So gratitude forces you. So when we practice gratitude, it forces you to focus on what it is that you already have or around you that you appreciate. And it takes that focus away from the negative, the things that we want, the things that we think we need. So when we practice gratitude, it's an opportunity to really just take a look at what we already have and say, wow, like I'm thankful that I have that. So turning those thought processes positive and again, creating that little bank of momentum for yourself.
Right. And so, okay, that sounds like it makes sense. But what does that, for a person like me, what does it actually look like? Tell me what that looks like. How do I actually practice that gratitude piece?
The beautiful thing about gratitude and practicing gratitude is that it can be relatively easy. So it doesn't require a huge commitment. So some of the ideas that I've given is it can be easy as first thing when you wake up in the morning, you look around and you choose something very small to be thankful for, right? And acknowledge it. And doing that every day. Other people have incorporated it into their family dinner times and everybody goes around the table to say what they're thankful for.
You mean we don't only
goes around the table to say what they're thankful for.
You mean we don't only do that at Thanksgiving?
No. If you can make it daily, that's great. Another way to practice gratitude is to have a journal. I know lots of people do that is they journal and reflect on their grateful thoughts or for the week. The key really, it doesn't matter what you choose. The key is consistency. So just choosing something that you can commit to on a consistent basis.
So do we have to do it every day?
No, you don't. You do need to choose something. So if you say, it could be like every other day, every day, every 3 days, once a week, just something that you can choose that gives you a little bit of momentum, and it keeps you accountable, and it's something that you can be successful with. That's the goal with a lot of the strategies that we'll talk about actually in this podcast on an ongoing basis. Is the key to any strategy really is in the consistency of it.
And that, I think, in thinking about it, there's a link there between the consistency and the sort of, it's almost like the repetition of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what gets sort of solidified in your brain. And so that helps the two pieces work together then, right? The gratitude piece and the happiness piece as well.
Yeah. And what I like about with any of the strategies, and this is important for everybody to remember, is that it doesn't matter what it is, right? So if you wake up every day for 2 weeks for your gratitude practice, and you're able to do that, I think that's fantastic, right? And that's a good place to start. And then at some point, you have to work towards, okay, so how can I challenge myself in one small way just to change it up, right? And just to force yourself to diversify your thought process, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe you would say that exact same thing that you've said in the morning. Maybe you would say it at lunchtime and just add another level to it. Or maybe you would change it to something different for another 2 weeks and saying the same thing every day for 2 weeks, right? The key is to have a little bit of success and to make it attainable. And then once you have a little bit of success, please challenge yourself a little bit.
Just when you're getting good, right? Then you need to throw
exactly.
yourself a little bit of a curveball to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how boring would life be?
Yeah.
There's some really good tips. So I want to go back and just sort of summarize some of the key things that we talked about today. So I feel like the first thing was understanding what is the actual definition of happiness and realizing that it's in sort of those small moments and taking note of those, being purposeful about it, making that bank within your brain, and so that they're there for when you maybe encounter a negative moment and you can reach back in and pull out that good little positive memory, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good for a few reasons. So that was one of the things that we talked about. Another piece was around having a sense of balance. We talked a little bit about that at the beginning, and we're going to actually talk about that a little bit more in one of our upcoming episodes, so stay tuned for that. Another piece that we talked about was this link between gratitude and happiness. So having some sort of gratefulness activity that you can practice on a consistent basis. Was there anything else that I missed about what we chatted about today that you want to summarize?
I think you did a really good job of capturing everything. One thing that I would like to add before we go is the importance of everybody just being easy on themselves. Give yourself a little bit of grace. This has been a very difficult year. This is a difficult time, and we really need to shift our focus on celebrating what we are able to do, and for everyone to celebrate their own little wins, no matter how small. And again, that just goes back to creating that beautiful little bank of great experiences and thoughts that we can pull on. So please give yourself grace and be easy on yourself.
And that's really good, thoughtful advice, I think, because it's something that we all forget. Mm-hmm. And so, again, seems maybe a little bit obvious, but it's so true that we do have to have that gracefulness when it comes to looking inward at ourselves.
Yeah.
Inward at ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wrap for today, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing your wisdom with us and your tips and your pieces of advice. It's really helpful, and I think it's something that can actually be practiced. So hopefully everybody got that sense from today's episode.
Yes, that's certainly the intention, and today, and put it into practice and hopefully see the positive effects of it. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate having you here along this journey with us. Please stay tuned for our next episode coming out soon, when we will discuss this unicorn of balance. We will close this episode with a quote from Brené Brown. I don't have to chase extraordinary moments to find happiness. It's right in front of me if I'm paying attention and practicing gratitude.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I wanted to share some important information before we let you go. While this podcast will give you strategies to use in your life, it is certainly not a replacement for attending therapy or seeking your own support.
There will always be limits to what we can do on our own when it comes to mental health. And while we can give you tools and strategies, we know that they will not always work for everyone. There is value in telling your story and being heard. If you have tried the strategies we discussed and you're still feeling stuck, please reach out to us at Simply Counseling Services. Visit our website at www.simplycounselingservices.com for the services we offer and to learn about the other services that are free. You can also submit your topic ideas for this podcast on this website as well. Thank you again for joining us, and we are looking forward to our next time together. Take care of yourself.